Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Mariah Carey. I am Mariah, the elusive Chanteuse. What do I say about Mariah Carey? Hell, what can I say? Because at this point, Mariah's career has spanned almost 25 years, a dozen albums, and more than her fair share of acclaim and influence. She's a performer whose iconic vocal delivery defined a decade of singers in R&B and pop music, and whose range could rarely be matched, if at all. Decades since her critical heyday in the 90s, her fans are still as devoted as ever. And yet for me, well, it's complicated. It's pretty much unquestioned that Mariah made 4 or 5 great albums in the 90s and then things kind of went awry. I can't say that I've ever really liked any of the materials that she released in the 2000s. Even the hit singles that somehow managed to dominate the chart again and again. And yet, even on that note, Mariah has never really evoked a lot of strong feelings in me outside of some admiration for her incredible voice and very real technique. What makes Mariah Carey special, at least for me, is that she makes it look all so easy and fun and shows off her prodigious talent for emotionally compelling delivery every single time. But on the other hand, Mariah Carey is not exactly an R&B act to which I can say I really love, like Janelle Monáe. I'm not denying that there's a place for her vocals, but there's also a fine line between making it look easy and looking like you're not trying. And there are albums in Mariah Carey's discography where that line blurs more often than not, especially in the early 2000s. And as a fan of strong lyrics, I've never found Mariah to be a stellar lyricist, and I often find her songs to be underwritten in favor of her vocal histrionics. The fact that she popularized vocal gymnastics for their own sake in songs throughout the 90s was a large reason that era of R&B never really stuck with me. But you know what? Even acknowledging that she's an icon, she's not one that has been at her best for over a decade now. The days of Daydream and Butterfly, they're long gone. And frankly, I'm a little bit surprised that she's continued to put out music. Given how many records that she has sold, and the fact that she's in her 40s and she's got kids, she doesn't need to keep making albums, especially if they're not going to be anywhere near as close to ambitious as her earlier material. But since she decided to put out a new album with a monumentally misleading title, I figured it was about time that I checked in to see if our elusive Chanteuse was going to deliver anything close to her old brand of quality. Did that happen? Well, not really. But then again, I don't know what else I could have expected. I am Mariah, the elusive Chanteuse. It's a modern Mariah Carey album regardless, and it has all the standard modern Mariah Carey issues that have cropped up on her albums throughout the past decade. If you can look past them, as most fans will, you'll probably be mostly satisfied with this album, because while it's nowhere near her best, it's not her worst either. Otherwise, okay, you know what, let's get those standard Mariah Carey issues out of the way first, because that's what most critics have held since Charm Bracelet, if not longer. Like it or not, her voice isn't quite what it was. I'm not saying that it's not still great, but it's experienced some wear and some stress, and the notes come across a little bit more strained, especially when she ascends into her typical vocal gymnastics. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm not entirely bothered by this. A little bit more raw grit in Mariah's voice adds some texture to it, and that's not exactly a bad thing. It shows experience and age in life. But at the same time, you can tell that there were a few producers on this album who struggled to accommodate her vocals and brought in pitch correction to compensate. And I'll say the same thing I say about artists who bring in unnecessary pitch correction who aren't trying to make a stylistic point. If you don't need it, don't use it. I don't know who in their right mind wants to hear Mariah Carey with auto-tune, because I certainly don't. And now the next big complaint that's often leveled against modern day Mariah Carey records is the hip-hop collaborations and how their harsher tone tends to be a poor fit for Mariah's vocals and subject matter. Honestly, I've never really been bothered by this in comparison with some, but I will say that of the collaborations on this album, both hip-hop and R&B, there's something of a mixed bag. The playful, nostalgic back and forth of the rough edge Dedication with Nas, that was a fair bit of fun. I like that. And while I think that a bigger presence on the track, like say Usher, might have been better fit for #Beautiful than Miguel, that song is still easily the best original song on this record. But you know what? Rich Homie Quan, Fabulous, and Hit Boy don't really offer much on their tracks outside of generic shouts and bragging. And although Wale does bring some personality to his lyrics, he's not really someone who's a good fit on that song lyrically. I'll come back to this. And yeah, while it was cute for Mariah to bring her twins on onto the track Supernatural, the song doesn't exactly have much appeal beyond that cuteness factor. And you know what? I'd be remiss to ignore the bonus material, which features just solid enough reworkings of It's a Rap and Betcha Gonna Know from Mariah's last album, featuring Mary J. Blige and R. Kelly with new verses. And you know what? I like R. Kelly's desperate defensive side of his story. It's a welcome return to that storytelling instinct that was missing from his last album. I like that. But you know what? The bigger issue comes through in the production, which honestly is my biggest frustration with this record. Because with Mariah's considerable vocal range and her presence, she's not a bad fit for some of the more opulent, expansive, epic sounding production. And minimalism isn't a bad fit for her. Hell, there are even points where I'm okay with the instrumentation being de-emphasized and stripped back to just percussion, and just letting her multi-tracked vocals fill in for the melody line. But I also can't help but feel that the lack of richer, less organic instrumentation isn't a great fit for her voice, especially as she's developed some vocal texture with age. So while the understated instrumentation on Cry, You're Mine Eternal, and the gospel-inspired Camouflage, the George Michael cover One More Try, and the extremely solid song The Art of Letting Go, songs like the Mike Will Made It produced Fade It, the trap-inspired Thirsty, the tinkling piano and egregious auto-tune on Supernatural, the Lady Gaga-inspired mid-90s dance track Meteorite, they just sound thin and a little bit chintzy to me. But even with that, sometimes the melody tonal choices can feel just a little bit awkward. For example, I really like the bouncy vibe of Make It Look Good, but that harmonica line just felt painfully out of place with the classier strings and piano. And that looped horn lead on Money, it just felt really blaring to me, especially with its more submerged position in the mix. Like it or not, it did not need to be there, or maybe a better tonal choice would have helped. And now we come back to the lyrics, where if I'm being embarrassingly honest, I had no expectations. Mariah has gone on record stating that she makes her lyrics less specific at points in order to relate to a larger audience, so that they can slot themselves into the situations, which is I've always felt to be detrimental to their emotional impact. I get that she wants her songs broad so that anyone can relate to them, but at the same time, by doing that, her lyrics feel increasingly undercooked and underwritten, and lacking in detail to really paint a descriptive picture of the situation, and we lose that personal touch that made an album like Butterfly so intimate and so very powerful. And really, we haven't seen any songs on this album and themes explored on this album that we haven't seen Mariah touch time and time again for her last 13 releases. We get breakup ballads, we get love ballads, we get sex jams, and the songwriting behind any of them did not impress me in the slightest, outside of a few problems that just stood out to me. Take the Wale collaboration, You Don't Wanna Know, a funky Beyonce-esque kiss-off anthem where Mariah replicates the slightly more soulful form in The Art of Letting Go, which is a better song. But then Wale tries to counterattack in his verse, and man, I just don't buy it. He just can't stand up against Mariah. He's outclassed. Or take Meteorite, a dance jam that tries to compel people to dance and grab that 15 minutes of stardom by comparing them to meteorites, which really is just a much more pyrotechnic misunderstanding of metaphors along the line of Katy Perry's Firework. Or take the song Money, a song with a chorus and lyrics suggesting that Mariah, she doesn't need money, and she just wants that sweet companionship and love. And then there are verses from Fabulous and Hit Boy glorifying the hustle and the same opulent wealth that Mariah Carey says she doesn't need. And doesn't that completely run against the theme of making your songs as relatable as possible when you bring in guest rappers bragging about jets and Rolexes? It just doesn't fit here. Ugh, look. In the end, I don't get why Mariah Carey added the subtitle The Elusive Chanteuse, because as a nickname for her, it makes no goddamn sense. Yes, Mariah is a chanteuse, a female lounge singer, or at least trying to be more of a female singer in that vibe. But she's a pop diva adored by millions and has sold millions of records, and she's one of the most influential music stars of the past 2 decades, and she's going to have hits off of this album. In one way, is that elusive? But you know what, nitpicking the title aside, this album's decent, I guess, and it gets a 6 out of 10 for me. It's not anything close to her best, mind you, but it's far from her worst. Fans will love it, non-fans won't have any new reasons to care, but over 2 decades into Mariah's career, I'd like to think that she's capable of more than this. It might be pretty, but you know what? That's only a step away from being pretty and pretty forgettable. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. People, especially Mariah fans, keep it civil in the comments. I wasn't saying something that deep down you guys probably already know. So yeah, if there's anything else I might be able to review, or if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. So until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.